team. Yes!
Bibby, big three-pointer for the rookie from Arizona.
Big Country Reeves needs to rebound from what was a terrible season.
Does everyone like basketball?
With the second pick in the 1999 NBA draft, the Vancouver Grizzlies select Steve Francis from the University of Maryland.
This is, with the second pick, Steve Francis, the astonishingly niche Vancouver Grizzlies basketball podcast, where we dust off those old VHS tapes of expansion 90s basketball and look for some of the beauty in 19-foot jump shots and never-ending post-entry passes. I'm here with the ranker of parks, drinker of fine local craft beers, Justin McElroy. How you doing, Justin?
Jeremy, I feel like this podcast is a microcosm for the Vancouver Grizzlies as a whole. We started off with such high hopes, and now we are just two people in the middle of a constant slog of agony. But I'm ready for another game. I'm ready for more high hopes, and I'm ready for the Grizzlies to crush my dreams yet again.
Well, let's stop you right there. I see what the metaphor and the line you're drawing here, but let's talk about a little something that happened on Instagram today. We got a little bit of a nod from the dude the podcast is named after, Stevie Franchise on Instagram. I'm not 100% convinced he knows it's a podcast yet, but he knows about our logo anyway.
And he enjoyed it enough to show it to his fans sort of positively, which may be the first time in Steve Francis's life he's talked about Vancouver without shitting on it immediately. So thank you, Steve. And anytime you want to go up on the podcast, that'd be cool too.
Anytime we'll have Stevie Franchise on, I'll tell you that much. And as you pointed out, it only took, 21 years, X amount of months and days for the approval of the Vancouver Grizzlies, Stevie Francis.
Almost as endless as the losing streak the Grizzlies were in their first season by the time we get to the game we're doing today. You know, in the first half of season 1, Vancouver was spunky. They had some buzzer beaters. They looked at times like a semi-competitive team. They went on an 8-12 run at one point, which a run being 8-12 is sort of the bar you have for Vancouver success. But in the second half, it was not going well at all. They had lost 15 games in a row by the time we come to today's game. On March 20th, 1996, the, at this point, 11-52 Vancouver Grizzlies against the 35-29, always spunky, always in playoff contention, never quite making it to the conference final, Atlanta Hawks.
This is Atlanta, Georgia, home to the 96 Olympic Games and home to the Atlanta Hawks. Tonight, it's Pontiac basketball on Grizzlies TV here at the Omni, with the Vancouver Grizzlies in town to battle the Atlanta Hawks.
The game is at the Omni, and Jeremy, the atmosphere here is about as putrid as Vancouver is.
Well, so we're, like you pointed out, we're at the Omni Coliseum, and it is like, I'm not joking, a fifth full, a quarter full. There's maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people there. The Grizz are coming in on their third game of 4 nights. The Hawks have had 3 nights off. And there's actually quite a bit to set up here just to give the lay of the land to our listeners. The game was on something called Grizzlies TV. They had a bizarre opening with a small redheaded child handing Super Grizz the ball outside of GM Place. The play-by-play is by a guy named Steve Physiok, with color commentary from Michael Thompson. That's Klay Thompson's dad, LA Laker from the 80s. The Grizzlies arrived late to this game because apparently the mobile walkway for their plane crashed into another plane or their plane, and that delayed their thing. They got there at 1 p.m. And Greg Anthony's out for this one because he was very awkwardly and weirdly tackled by the 7'6" Sean Bradley in New Jersey the night before. And Greg Anthony rolls over and absolutely clocks him right in the head. And he's suspended for the game with a $5,000 fine. So yeah, lots to think about going into this one. And also just wanted to point out the Hawks jerseys in this one, just brutal. They're those, they've moved away from the Pac-Man, the beautiful Pac-Man with the red and yellow. And they've got the cartoon hawk that wraps around to the back so that if you see them from the back, it looks like the hawk is hugging them. Very brutal jerseys, especially considering what we know they could have. It was an interesting start to this one, just with all kinds of little foibles leading into it. But tell us about the starters.
Starting lineup for the Atlanta Hawks in this game. You know, Jeremy, you talk about the cartoonishness of the Hawks jerseys, but for me, I like it just because I was a kid then. It's the late 90s, and not only that, this was a pretty classic Hawks team in that they made the playoffs many years in a row with the same core. We've got Mookie Blaylock at guard, we've got Steve Smith at the 2 spot, Christian Laettner acquired earlier in the season from the Timberwolves at center. We've got the Plastic Man, Stacey Augmon, providing good two-way play as well. We don't quite have Mutombo yet. He comes in for the Hawks next season, but we get future Grizzly Grant Long here. So again, solid starters all throughout the lineup. Big reason why they've made the playoffs year after year during this era. Grizzlies not so much. G-Money Greg Anthony out of the lineup, which means the pickings are slim.
Yeah, they've got Gerald Wilkins, who's been back for 13 games at this point. Big Country, our rock in the middle. Eric Murdoch standing in for Greg Anthony at the point. Blue Edwards, almost as always. And Ashraf Amaya getting the start in this one for the Grizz. And a little tip of the cap, as you pointed out, the Plastic Man, one of the greatest all-time nicknames in the NBA. Let's move to the first quarter at the Omni Coliseum, Grizzlies Hawks. Early on, not too much to talk about outside of some pretty sloppy play in the first quarter, but Grant Long is balling. He's rebounding, he's finishing, he looks amazing. And I had that thought in my head of like, I could just see Stu Jackson watching this game and like marking down in his little notebook, like, to do, sign Grant Long.
Do it 3 years from now after we've exhausted all possible other forwards to play with Big Country.
Seriously.
The quarter is back and forth. It's not really flowing all that much. We get a couple back-to-back Gerald Wilkins dunks at one point, which is the highlight of the Gerald Wilkins experience in Vancouver.
Scored. Long has it picked, and here comes Gerald Wilkins. Watch this.
Nice and easy. Doesn't want to wear out those legs too early in the game.
Near the end of the quarter, we get a nice Eric Murdoch basket, but then he gets a janky miss later. The quarter finishes 23-23, tied all.
I should also point out, Justin, that at one point, Michael Thompson does call Ashraf Amaya Vancouver's Dennis Rodman. So that was definitely one of the highlights for me for a good chortle.
Yeah, the announcers were just sort of free associating for most of the night. Sometimes they went like 2 or 3 seconds saying nothing. It was a little bit weird, but I did enjoy the enthusiasm from Fiziok and Thompson, and I did enjoy just having a home team announcing group after the road ones that we've gotten. Of course, they weren't long for the Grizzlies. After the first season, they were replaced by having Don Poirier and Jay Toronto. The radio team simply simulcast games, whether it was on Check, VTV, what have you, for the rest of the way of the Grizzlies era in Vancouver. First quarter tied, as we said, and at the end of the first quarter, we go to our segment known as
Watching Big Country. You know, this one, and, you know, let's be transparent here. One of the reasons we wanted to watch this game wasn't because we were dying to see the middle of the road perennial 7th seed in the East Atlanta Hawks. It was because we wanted to bring a bona fide good Big Country game. And this was one of those games, you know. It was interesting because in the first quarter and first half, he actually starts out really slow and he only has 5 points in the first half. However, you can tell he's got a game in him kind of right from the start because there's just this energy. There's a spring in his step. As soon as he's touching the ball, he's making decisive moves. He's not connecting at first, but eventually it starts to fall. He ends up with 15 points in the second half, including 3 and 1.
Country gets the pick. There's the roll. And 2 more for BC. 9 points and 1 more free throw coming
So
away.
what I take from that and what I took from this game was he's actually starting to move away from solely dedicated rolling right-hand hooks and fadeaway over the right shoulder shots to, hey man, I'm going to get to the hoop and I'm going to get fouled and I'm going to finish. And I was actually really, really impressed with that specific part of his game.
You know, it's interesting because we started this series with a few clunkers from country, and that was sort of what happened a lot of the times in his first 30 games with the Grizzlies. He was raw. He was not ready to be a starter in the NBA, but Vancouver treated him as such, and he just looked out of touch a lot of times, and I think really set the tone and expectations, especially outside of Vancouver, for what he was going to be. But in the second half of this season, let me throw some stats at you, Jeremy. From December 15th to April 15th, 54 game span, he gets 16 points a game, he gets 9 rebounds a game, he shoots 47% from the floor. These are good starter numbers, and all those entry passes they feed him, it seems to build up his confidence a bit. And watching this game, you know, he's nimble around the post within like 3-4 feet. He has a lot of quickness, actually. He's able to play defense and hold Atlanta to a draw there. I'm not going to say that he runs up the court, but he's able to be part of fast breaks. He gets a couple nice and ones by doing just quick cuts in the post as well. You know, this is a player now that we can see, and you can see that potential why Vancouver drafted him, and you can be excited for the player that you think he's going to come. He never fully gets there, but he shows in this first season, in the second half of the first season, there's not a lot of highlights for the Vancouver Grizzlies. Bryant Reeves becoming an NBA starter is one of them.
Yeah, and let's remember too, this is still a rookie, and rookies take time to develop. And I like that you mentioned the defense because his rebounding was really solid in this game. He was getting, the timing down. He's the biggest guy on the floor, and you could see that big white paw of his reaching up, and it would be the first to the ball because he could get up higher than everyone else. And, he was even, he had a block that was uncredited that was quite impressive, kind of like a flying tip. And he finishes the game, 39 minutes, 20 points, 11 rebounds, a steal, only 2 turnovers, 8 of 16 from the field and 4 or 5 from the line. You leave that going, if this is a rookie and you're thinking about, a 6, 8, 10, 12-year career, you got to be feeling awesome if you're the Grizzlies when you look at Bryant Reeves in this game.
Ultimately, Country didn't finish in the top 5 in voting for NBA Rookie of the Year this year. I think the die was cast too early on, and there were enough starters who were probably better from him. But like I said, I think he's the highlight in the second half of the season, and you can see why there was faith that he could grow into maybe a borderline all-star. And second quarter, again, back and forth basketball, not particularly good back and forth basketball. We got a nice Stacey Augmon dunk at one point. We get the requisite second quarter. Byron Scott comes off the bench and makes a couple of nice long buckets.
Byron is stroking it in the second quarter.
Moten goes corner, Byron Scott. I think it's a great decision by Moten.
Yeah, it was great ball movement by the Grizzlies. About 5 different guys touched the ball before Byron finally got a shot off.
12 points in the quarter. He finished with 18, but he had 12 of them in that quarter. Like, he couldn't miss. It was great.
And that's what Byron does. And it's that smooth shot from deep or long to contrast that nice arc with the shot with our first appearance of Lawrence Moten, a fan favorite in Vancouver for his 2 seasons. And he had some energy. He could play good defense. But Jeremy, that shot was not exactly all world.
Yeah, it was interesting to see him because I was like, okay, there's those shin-high socks that we used to copy when we were in high school. And he had great energy, decent handles because the Hawks were actually picking them up full court a lot and actually trapping at half as well. So it's good to see someone with a good handle in there. But for some reason, and this is one of those Brian Winters head scratchers, they have Lawrence Moten go to post up Mookie Blaylock on back-to-back possessions in the second quarter. And the first one's a fadeaway that's kind of a brick off the back of the rim. And then the second one, he works him inside and he just gets spike blocked because, as far as I could tell, Lawrence Moten, not a terribly experienced post-up player, but I enjoyed getting to watch him for the first time and at least seeing that he brought some kind of verve to the game for the squad.
Jeremy, we've watched enough Grizzlies games from the first season now that we know they pretty much only have 2 plays that they go to. Feed the ball to Big Country in the post or let Greg Anthony penetrate and try and make something happening. And Greg Anthony ain't in this game, so the options are limited, and the Lawrence Moten post-up is about as good as we're going to get. Still, though, in the second quarter, we do get a couple classic poetry in Moten plays. He gets a nice steal and a dunk at one point.
Stacey Augmon wanted it. Lawrence Moten with the steal and slam.
Well, that's what he did for so many years in Syracuse.
Chris King makes a long baseline 2. Nothing is really happening for the Hawks, and so at halftime, against a playoff team, the Vancouver Grizzlies are up 51-48. And it's halftime, which brings us to our next segment.
What did Stu do now?
Okay, well, we've got a couple here. I'll start with mine. There's so many that you and I just had to split them up to share it around, share the wealth, share the poverty, I suppose. So Rich Manning, we've got Rich Manning in this game. He's a center. He went to the University of Washington and Syracuse, if I'm not mistaken. Big white guy in the middle. And I have to admit, of all the games we've watched, with the caveat that this guy made the NBA, he's, a great athlete and hell of a lot better at hoops than I ever was. But this is the first guy I've seen this year where I was annoyed and was thinking, like, this guy is clearly not an NBA caliber player. Like, why is he in this game at all? So I started taking notes on some of the plays. He almost falls over trying to defend a Christian Laettner spin move on the baseline. For some reason, they go to him in the post like 4 times, 5 times. One of those times, he just panics and throws a brick that almost breaks the backboard, makes a brutal turnover out of the post in sheer panic. And I bet you're wondering, like, okay, why is this Stu Jackson's fault? Well, let me tell you, fine listener. So first of all, this guy's a 25-year-old rookie. So doesn't that tell you something?
Red flag.
Yeah, red flag. 25-year-old rookie. No one's taken a chance on him to this point. So he signs with the Grizzlies. Stu signs him on October 5th of 95. Waives him on November 27th, so a month and a half later. But whoop, here comes the, spin the vinyl sound. Signs him again on January 12th. And then a year later, he's off the team. He only gets 10 more games in the show with the Clippers, and he's out of the league. So he had 55 games in total in the NBA, and 45 were with Vancouver. And I don't think he was really equipped ever to be an NBA player. But for some reason, Stu Jackson was just willing to give Rich Manning lots of run, the 25-year-old rookie.
We saw a little too much of Rich Manning in the second half of the season. Who we didn't see at all was Kenny Gadison, one of the high expansion picks by the Grizzlies, someone who had lots of experience. Everyone praised his veteran character. He had too many injuries and decided that he needed to retire. But Stu picked him with 2 years left on his contract. There was 1 still to go. And so he ended up trading Gadison for Jeff Turner, a player for the Orlando Magic who was also injured and never going to come back again. But to facilitate this salary dump, the Grizzlies also gave the Magic a second-round pick. And look, second-round picks aren't the biggest thing in the world, but they are assets at the end of the day. And the player the Magic chose with that pick at 49, Amal McCaskill, didn't do much, but it could have ended up being Shandon Anderson, who was picked 54th. So a possible player the Grizzlies could have had that went away because of that trade. And again, Stu Jackson at the time said that he made this trade to give the Grizzlies more cap space in future seasons, next season particularly. It's not that they did anything too valuable with that at the end of the day. So again, this is a chance where the Grizzlies did have assets to begin with, and again, sometimes through bad luck, and sometimes through Stu just making certain decisions, had less and less of those assets turn out to things as the years went on.
Yeah, no, it blows my mind every time to hear, like, I just don't get how that end result is always wave, cut. And it's like, you got to turn something into something at some point. You can't just keep turning your assets into dust. On to the third quarter, Grizzlies, Hawks. One thing I wrote down about the third quarter is Ashraf Amaya had 2 possessions where he looked like a borderline all-star. And then the best thing was how quickly he came crashing back down to reality with just a brutal air ball from the baseline. And it's like, okay, all's well in the world. We're back to kind of normal here. But he looked great for just that little spurt. It was almost like Antonio Harvey-esque in a way.
Yeah, some spunk by Amaya. I looked back afterwards thinking, did I miss something key in the Ashraf Amaya era, so decadent it was in Vancouver? But no, it turns out that at the end of the day, Ashraf Amaya only played that 1 season for the Grizz, 54 games, 20 minutes, 6 points, 48% from the field. Basically just another Chris King clone, one of these guys that wasn't awful and didn't take anything away, but certainly didn't give the Grizzlies any wins. And he played for during the middle part of this season where they just lost game after game. He's in there in this third quarter where, again, nothing is particularly happening. Mookie Blaylock is just getting brick after brick. He ends up going 0 for 10 at one point before he makes a three-pointer. And we're also seeing a lot of long twos. And it's, you're watching mid-90s NBA basketball when there's just inefficient two after inefficient two with possessions that didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, and so the third quarter also is where Big Country comes alive. That's where the and ones start happening. He starts feeling it a little bit. And as far as the Hawks are concerned, the only thing really of note you get in the third quarter is a little flash of Leitner brilliance. He scores 6 straight, though I would point out 2 of those 6 came on a wide open shot when you could see him gather the ball and try to explode to the hoop for a dunk, and he gets 4/5 of the way up. And you can see him go, oh, not getting high enough to dunk, and he ends up laying it in. So you can kind of see it's the beginning of the end as far as, his body and his athleticism being able to hold up to the grind of the NBA, I suppose. But not too much happening in that third quarter to speak of, I would say.
The third quarter comes to a close. This mediocre game at this point has Vancouver still up. Still with a chance, up 69-64, and that brings us to our third quarter segment.
Better know a Grizzly.
And today, we're going to get finally we have the chance to talk a little bit about Gerald Wilkins. He was one of the big name veterans that were really touted in that first game we did. I remember McKeechee wanted to talk about him. They all wanted to talk about Gerald Wilkins. He's got that kind of NBA royalty last name, right? He was the 20th pick in the expansion draft for the Grizz. Always been known as a high flyer, much like his brother Dominique. He had, however, missed the entire previous season with an Achilles injury, which is like a fate almost worse than death for someone who relies on explosiveness for their NBA game. Only ends up playing 28 games for the Grizzlies, kind of sad, and had sad numbers too. 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal in about 26 minutes per game on really bad shooting numbers, 38% from the field, 22% from 3, and he was taking 2.5 threes a game as well. So it was absolutely brutal. One thing I wanted to throw your way, Justin, was that Basketball Reference actually denotes that one of Gerald's nicknames is, quote, Jordan Stopper.
Well, and this is it, because there was more cachet around Gerald Wilkins joining the Grizzlies than any other veteran that first season, save for Byron Scott. And it was because he had so much experience as a solid player, getting 10 to 20 points a game for years on playoff teams. And often he was playing in the playoffs against Michael Jordan, and that's how he got that nickname, the Jordan Stopper. And it's not like he stopped Michael Jordan, obviously,
no.
But Jordan himself said that, Gerald Wilkins played him hard, he was athletic, he was strong, he was willing to exert himself on the defensive end a lot, and it made it difficult for Michael. And so he had this reputation, announcers around the league knew around him. And so that first season, for those first 50 games or so, when Vancouver kept saying, well, Wilkins is injured, he's going to come back, I sort of had like a Bart Simpson, Krusty is coming, Krusty is coming, Krusty is coming. Like somehow his defense is going to save this awful team. And then he starts to play, and it's just not there. He doesn't have the speed. It's like he was a 32-year-old that was out for a season with an Achilles injury, and it is just not happening whatsoever. And, we talk about earlier, what did Stu do now? This is a huge what did Stu do now, because he used a high expansion pick on this player that, just with the benefit of hindsight, was never going to recover and was never going to give this team the actual productive minutes that they needed.
Yeah, that's a great point as far as the kind of like looking to someone for a bright spot or a burst, or I guess he probably brought some veteran leadership. I do remember him giving some good clips about the team sticking together and that kind of thing. But looking back on some of his stats, his best season came with the Knicks when he was only 23, and he had some borderline all-star numbers, 19 points, 4 assists, 4 rebounds in 35 minutes with the Knicks. I should point out, and I do this with as much earnestness as possible, Gerald has had quite a tough past year. He's been twice arrested for allegedly violent crimes and once hospitalized for mental health issues. So, here's hoping he gets better and, there's some level of justice for the alleged victims in those crimes as well.
It's the beginning of the fourth quarter. Grizzlies up by 5. We get a couple Manning throwing it away on 2 straight possessions. Thanks for that. We do get a lovely Lawrence Moten alley-oop from Wilkins at one point. The Grizzlies are still up. Eric Murdoch gets a nice long 2. Hawks are keeping it close. Grizzlies, though, are up 80-76 with 6 minutes left in the game. This could be the chance for them to break this long losing streak. And then Steve Smith happens.
Yeah, basically, Steve Smith comes in and says, no thanks, or he awoke from his slumber, or, kind of like Jordan, he just said, wait a minute, why is this solid team of mine playing around with the Vancouver Grizzlies?
Steve Smith for 3.
He ties it up at 80. Lead.
Smith goes back to work from outside to give the Hawks a 1-point edge.
Switches there.
Oh, and Steve Smith has just caught fire. These late minutes. Steve Smith again. That's 4 threes in the fourth.
Boy, where did he come from all of a sudden, huh?
And this was crazy, though. Like, he was unconscious. He hits 3 threes, and I think under a minute. He hits a 3, Grizzly turnover, hits a 3, Grizzly miss, hits a 3. Like, it happens so fast, and with a blink of an eye, they're up 6. And these are just picturesque strokes. Like, and they're not even jump shots. They're that nice set shot from above the head, beautiful wrist flick. It barely looks like he's even putting any effort into it, and the ball's not touching the mesh at all. And he ends up with 19 points in the fourth quarter. He hits 4 threes, and he ends up with 26 points on 8 of 16 shooting, all part of a 20-8 Atlanta run that ends the game. And if that sounds anticlimactic, it's because it really was. Like, he just started hitting shots, and basically the game was over.
It was real NBA Jam. He's on fire vintage. Not just the sheer amount of threes he made, but just that lovely long arc to it. And depressing to watch as a Grizzlies fan, but you have to admire the showmanship of Smith there. And it was just another situation where the Grizzlies hung around for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, were scrappy. The other team was not playing so great. And then it just, all you need is a light switch going off with either the entire team or, in this case, one guy on the Hawks of like, all right, we need to win this. And then it seemed to over. And as soon as Smith made those barrage of threes, I really did not have any confidence in Vancouver, because you look at what their options are, especially with Anthony not in the game. Are you going to give it to Reeves in the post and he's suddenly going to turn into Rick Smits? No. This is a team that lacked options, and if another team turned it on offense, there was not a heck of a lot that Vancouver was able to do. And so we went from 80-76 for the Grizzlies to down 88-98 in just the blink of an eye, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, that's the Grizzlies experience, right? It's the like grind. Oh, hey, and then you stupidly allow yourself to think they could win this one, man. They could win this one. You never know. And I think that's really like what, especially when you talk about an 82 game grinding marathon season, is that's what separates, I wasn't going to say a great team, because the Hawks were certainly not a great team, but even a good team, a solid team from a Vancouver Grizzlies team, which is the Grizzlies when they enter the fourth quarter, or say the last 5, 6, 7 minutes of the fourth quarter, all they have to fall back on is exactly what they've been doing the whole game, which is continue to grind, continue to force feed country, try and hit some threes, try and create, try and grind on defense. Whereas these other teams can hit that other gear. They've got a Steve Smith, they've got a Michael Jordan, they've got a Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, whoever it may be, to be like, okay, I can take it to the next gear. I'm going to make something happen. It's like shot creation, offense from one guy to win a game. And the Grizzlies just absolutely didn't have that. We think highly of Greg Anthony, but that's a hit or miss scenario, right?
proposition. The NBA is a star-driven league, and we say that and we hear that all the time, and it doesn't just mean in terms of the fame of the players and the personalities involved in what sells, but it's about how you win games. And when there's only 5 guys on the court, if one person has singular talent or that ability to take over with their shooting, with their isolation play, with their athleticism, then that is so difficult for another team to overcome if they have a lesser star. And the Grizzlies, basically their entire career, always had the lesser star. And all it took was for one player on the opposite team, and tonight it was Steve Smith, to show that they were going to play, and Vancouver rarely had the bullets to match it. And so today it was a 98-93 loss at the end of it. That was their 16th straight loss. It was in the midst of a 23-game loss, their longest ever losing streak, and the longest losing streak at that time in NBA history. It was not pretty, and this game was very reflective of what it was like to watch a Grizzlies game in the second half of the season 1.
They lost 29 of 30 after the All-Star break. It was absolutely crazy. And with that, this has been With the Second Pick, Steve Francis. I'm Jeremy Allingham for Justin McElroy. That wraps up the 1995-1996 Vancouver Grizzlies inaugural season for us. We will be back with a wrap-up of 95-96, and then on to 96-97. Here we go.